At 3:47 in the morning, a stranger appeared on my wharf holding my dead wife's compass. She called me Daddy. The police believed her. My son believed her. But I spent 50 years on the Atlantic reading storms before they hit, and this woman could not tie a single knot. That was all I needed to know. Someone had sent her. And whoever sent her had just made the worst mistake of their life. 3:47 is not a time for good news. It is the hour when the tide shifts off Cape Ann, when the lobster boats are still sleeping in their slips, and the only sounds are the groaning of dock lines and the slap of black water against the pilings. I know this because I have lived by that rhythm for half a century. My name is Eugene Kowalski. People call me Gene. For 50 years, I captained the Mary Helen out of Gloucester, Massachusetts, dragging nets through the North Atlantic in weather that would make younger men weep. I retired 6 years ago. My wife Helen died 4 years after that. Stroke, quick and cruel, like a rogue wave that comes out of nowhere and swallows you whole. I have one son, Tommy. He is 36 years old, works as an accountant in Boston, and married a woman named Rachel 3 years ago. That is the full census of my bloodline. One son. No daughters. Not ever. So when my phone rang at 3:47 on that November morning, cutting through the silence of my empty house like a foghorn, I expected trouble from Tommy. Maybe another overdraft. Maybe another argument with Rachel that ended with him sleeping in his car. I fumbled for the receiver, my joints stiff from the cold that seeps into coastal houses no matter how high you set the heat. The voice on the line was not Tommy. It was clipped, official, and carried the weight of authority. Mr. Kowalski, this is Lieutenant Carver with the Coast Guard station at Gloucester Harbor. We have a situation at your wharf. There is a woman here. She is in distress. She has no identification, but she is holding a personal item with your name engraved on it. She claims to be your daughter. I sat up in bed. The springs groaned beneath me like an old hull settling. I told him he had the wrong man. I told him I have one child, a son, and his name is Tommy Kowalski. I told him there is no daughter. There has never been a daughter. Check your records, Lieutenant. You have the wrong wharf. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the wind howling through the receiver, the sound of the open harbor at night. Then Carver spoke again, and his voice had shifted from professional to something harder. Sir, she is standing on your property. She knows the name of your vessel. She knows details about your home. And the item she is holding, it is a brass compass engraved with the initials H.K. She says it belonged to her mother, Haka Helen Kowalski. My blood did not run cold. It froze. It turned to ice in my veins, the way seawater freezes on the deck rails during a January gale. That compass. I bought it for Helen on our 25th anniversary. She kept it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink so she could watch it catch the morning light. It was the only thing that went missing the night she died. The paramedics came, the neighbors came, the funeral home came, and somewhere in that chaos the compass vanished. I searched for weeks. I tore apart closets and crawl spaces. I accused the cleaning woman. I never found it. And now a stranger was standing on my dock in the dark, holding it against her chest. I told the lieutenant I was coming. Not to claim her. To see the compass for myself. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my cane from beside the door, and stepped out into the November wind. The air hit my face like a slap, heavy with salt and the smell of low tide. My truck was parked in the gravel drive, the old Ford with 200,000 miles on it that Rachel always said I should replace with something dignified. I do not need dignity. I need a vehicle that starts in the cold. The drive to the wharf takes 4 minutes from my house. I have made it 10,000 times. But that night, the road felt longer. The streetlights were halos of yellow in the fog, and Gloucester at night looked like a painting left out in the rain, everything blurred and bleeding at the edges. I pulled up to the gate of Kowalski Wharf. The chain link was open. Lieutenant Carver was standing under the mercury vapor light with 2 other officers. And beyond them, at the very end of the dock where the Mary Helen is moored, I saw her. She was small, thin, wearing a coat that was too big for her frame, her hair plastered to her face by the mist. She was rocking on her heels, clutching something against her chest with both hands. I walked toward her. My cane struck the wooden planks with a steady rhythm, each tap echoing across the water. She heard me coming. She turned. Her face was pale, streaked with tears and rain. Her eyes were wide, wild, filled with something that looked like terror and hope twisted together. She looked at me the way a drowning person looks at a rescue boat. And then I saw what she was holding. The compass. Brass. Tarnished green at the edges from years of salt air. The glass face was cracked in the upper left corner. A crack I made myself when I dropped it on the kitchen floor in 2003. Helen had laughed and said it gave it character. I knew that crack. I knew that compass. I knew it the way I know my own hands. This woman, this stranger, was holding the last piece of my wife that I could not find. And the question that hit me was not who is she. The question was who gave it to her. Because that compass did not walk out of my house on its own. Someone had been inside my home. Someone had taken the one thing Helen loved most, and they had placed it in the hands of this shaking girl, like a weapon aimed directly at my heart. I looked at the compass. I looked at her, and I felt the deck shift beneath my feet, the way it does when a storm is coming, and the barometric pressure drops so fast your ears pop. Something terrible was approaching, and it was already too late to outrun it. Before I could speak, before I could demand answers from this shaking stranger, a sound cut through the fog behind me. The sharp click of heels on wet wood. I knew that sound. It was the sound of money walking into a room. The sound of control. Rachel. She came down the dock like a woman who owned it. Her coat was buttoned to the neck, her hair pulled back tight. Not a strand out of place at 4 a.m. That alone should have told me something. A woman who gets a call at this hour and shows up looking like she is walking into a board meeting is a woman who was already awake. A woman who was expecting the call. Tommy trailed behind her. He was wearing sweatpants and a jacket thrown over bare skin, his eyes puffy and confused. He looked like a man dragged out of bed. Rachel looked like a woman who had never gone to sleep. She swept past me without a word. She went straight to the girl, to this stranger clutching Helen's compass, and she dropped to her knees on the wet dock planks. She wrapped her arms around the woman's shoulders. The gesture was smooth, rehearsed. The kind of embrace that looks perfect in a photograph, but carries no warmth. "Oh, sweetheart." Rachel's voice was thick with manufactured emotion. "Oh, honey, we are here now. You are safe. Daddy is here. We found you." I stood there with my cane planted on the dock like an anchor. Daddy. She called me Daddy through this stranger's ears, as if saying it enough times would make it true. Lieutenant Carver walked over to me. He had his notepad out. "Mr. Kowalski, your daughter-in-law has been providing us with some context. She says this young woman is your biological daughter from a relationship in Portland, Maine, 1993. She says the family has been aware of her existence, but that you have been reluctant to acknowledge her publicly due to your late wife's feelings on the matter." I stared at him. Portland, 1993. The words hit me somewhere deep, somewhere I had buried under decades of silence. But I held my face steady. A captain does not flinch in front of his crew. "That is a lie," I said. My voice came out flat and hard, like a hull scraping against rock. "I do not have a daughter. I have never claimed a daughter. And whatever story that woman is telling you, she fabricated it." Carver looked at me, then at Rachel, who was now helping the stranger to her feet, rubbing her back, murmuring comforts. He looked like a man caught between two currents and unsure which one to follow. Rachel turned to face me. Her eyes were wet. Actual tears. I had seen this woman negotiate the price of a used car down by $4,000 without blinking. and now she was crying on a dock at 4 in the morning. The performance was flawless. "Dad," she said softly, loud enough for every officer within earshot. "I know this is hard. I know you have kept this secret for so long that it feels impossible to let go. But she found us. She found the house. She had Mom's compass. You cannot keep running from this." I took a step toward her. My cane struck the wood hard. "Do not call me Dad," I said through my teeth. "And do not put my wife's name in your mouth. I do not know this girl. Someone stole that compass from my home. And I want to know who. And I want to know how." Rachel shook her head slowly. That sad, patient shake that doctors give to families in waiting rooms. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. She unfolded it carefully, protecting it from the mist, and handed it to Lieutenant Carver. "This is her birth certificate," Rachel said. "State of Maine. Born November 19th, 1993. Father listed as Eugene Kowalski of Gloucester, Massachusetts." Carver took it. He studied it under the mercury light. I watched his face change. The skepticism softened into something worse. "Belief. Mr. Kowalski," he said. "This document appears authentic. The state seal is present. The filing number is consistent with Maine records from that period." "It is a forgery," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt the ground shifting. I felt the tide turning against me. Rachel had come prepared. She had documents. She had tears. She had the police eating out of her hand like trained seals. Tommy stood behind his wife. He would not look at me. His eyes were fixed on the dock planks, his hands jammed deep in his jacket pockets. He looked like a man being slowly crushed by a weight he could not name. "Tommy," I called out. "Son, look at me. Tell them this is nonsense." He looked up. His eyes were red and watery, and for a moment, I thought he was going to speak the truth. I thought my boy was going to stand up straight and tell these officers that his wife was a liar and this whole scene was a circus. But then his eyes slid to Rachel. Just a glance. A fraction of a second. And I saw the leash pull tight. "Dad," he mumbled. Just let us take her home. We can sort this out in the morning. It is cold. She is scared. Please do not make a scene." A scene. My son was asking me not to make a scene while his wife stole my life out from under me on my own property. Carver closed his notebook. "Mr. Kowalski, given the documentation and your family's willingness to provide care, we are releasing the individual into your custody. I strongly advise you to cooperate. Adult Protective Services will follow up early next week." He said it like he was doing me a favor. Like he was being merciful to a confused old fisherman who could not remember his own sins. They walked her to Rachel's car. The black SUV, with tinted windows and leather seats that smelled of something floral and toxic. I refused to ride with them. I got in my truck alone. I needed the silence. I needed to think. I followed their taillights through the fog. Gloucester at 4:30 in the morning is a ghost town. The fish processing plants are dark. The restaurants on Main Street are shuttered. The harbor is a forest of masts rocking in the swell. I drove past all of it, seeing none of it. My mind was caught in a net of questions with no answers. When we pulled into my driveway, Rachel was already out of the car, helping the girl toward my front door. My door. My house. The house I built with 30 years of hauling cod and haddock out of water so cold it burned. I unlocked the door. The warmth of my home hit me. Coffee grounds and cedar, and the faint ghost of Helen's perfume that still clung to the curtains in the living room. Rachel walked in first, flicking on lights like she owned the place. The stranger stepped over the threshold behind her. And then the stranger did something that made my stomach drop. She stopped in the hallway. She looked to the left, toward the kitchen. She looked to the right, toward the stairs, and her eyes moved across the walls, the ceiling, the crown molding, with a precision that had nothing to do with memory. It was the look of a surveyor. the look of someone calculating square footage, the look of someone who was not coming home. She was appraising it. And in that moment, standing in my own hallway watching a stranger measure my life for sale, I understood. This was not a reunion. This was an invasion. And my own son had opened the gate. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by my bedroom window, watching the gray light slowly bleed into the sky over the Atlantic. The house was full of strangers now, full of people wearing the masks of family. I could hear Rachel's voice through the floorboards below me, low and urgent, the way a general sounds when issuing orders. By 6:30, the gulls were screaming over the harbor. I went downstairs. My hip was grinding like a rusted winch, but my mind was sharp. A fisherman learns early that the ocean kills you the moment you stop paying attention. I was paying very close attention now. Maya was sitting at my kitchen table. She was holding a mug with both hands, staring into the steam. The compass was placed carefully on a folded napkin in front of her like a museum piece. She looked up when I entered and gave me a small, trembling smile. "Good morning." "I made coffee. I hope that is okay." I poured myself a cup and sat across from her. I studied her the way I study the horizon, before deciding whether to take the boat out. You read the clouds. You feel the wind. You watch the water for what is hiding beneath. That is how I looked at this woman, not as a father looking at a child. As a captain reading the sea. After a few minutes of silence, I stood up. "Come outside," I said. "I need help with something on the dock." She followed me through the back door, across the dead grass, down the wooden steps to the private dock. The Mary Helen sat in her slip, rocking gently. I pointed to the bow line. I had untied it an hour before dawn, specifically for this moment. "That line is coming undone. Tie it off for me. My hands are stiff this morning." A simple request. A bowline and a half hitch on a dock cleat. Any child who grows up within a mile of Gloucester Harbor can do it by 6 years old. You learn it from your father. You learn it at summer camp. You learn it watching lobstermen at the town pier. If this woman was my daughter, raised anywhere near coastal Maine, she would know this knot, like her own name. Maya picked up the line. Her fingers fumbled. They crossed the wrong way. She wrapped the rope around the cleat in a spiral that would slip free with the first pull of current. It was not a bowline. It was not a half hitch. It was nothing. It was the effort of a landlocked person who had never held a dock line in her life. She stepped back. "Like that?" she asked. I looked at the mess of rope. Something settled in my chest. Not anger. Certainty. "That will do," I said. Kept my voice easy. Just an old man, grateful for help. I turned and walked back toward the house, letting my shoulders slump more than necessary. She was not my daughter. She had never lived near the sea. Whoever sent her had prepared documents and compasses and tears, but they forgot the one thing you cannot fake, the knowledge that lives in your hands from a lifetime on the water. I did not confront her. A younger man might have grabbed that loose line and shaken it in her face. But I have spent 50 years learning one lesson. You do not fight the current. You read it. You let it carry you to where the fish are hiding. Then you drop the net. This girl was bait. Someone had put her on my hook to distract me from the real predator circling below. I was going to find out who. I went back inside, made a second coffee, sat in the living room pretending to read the Gloucester Daily Times, while Rachel arrived at 9 with grocery bags and false cheer, while Tommy came and went without meeting my eyes, while Maya drifted through my house like a ghost in borrowed clothes. I played my part, the confused old man slowly softening. I let my eyes go unfocused when Rachel spoke. I repeated questions. I called Maya by the wrong name once, then corrected myself with a bumbling apology. I was casting a net of my own, and the mesh was made of weakness. That night, the house settled into darkness. Rachel left at 9:30. Tommy went to bed upstairs. Maya was in the guest room down the hall. I sat in my armchair in the dark, listening. At 11:42, I heard it. the creak of a floorboard, the back door opening with its familiar squeal, the click of the latch. I moved to the kitchen window. Maya was on the back porch, a phone pressed to her ear. The screen lit her face blue and ghostly. She was whispering, but the wind carried her voice through the cracked window above the sink. I am trying. Her voice was different now. No tremble, no little girl act. It was sharp, stressed, desperate. Give me more time. He is not what you said. He watches me like he knows. A pause. She listened to someone. Her knuckles went white on the railing. I know what is at stake. Just give me until next week. I will get him to trust me. She hung up, stood in the cold for a long moment, then went back inside. I stayed in the dark. My heart beat steady and slow, the way it does when you are hauling a net full of something heavy, and you do not yet know what is inside. She was reporting to someone. She had a handler, and her handler was getting impatient. Good. Impatient people make mistakes, and mistakes are how you find the end of the line. The cage was built around me slowly, the way fog rolls in off the Atlantic. You do not notice it happening until you look up and realize you cannot see the shore anymore. It started with the phone. 3 days after Maya arrived, I picked up the landline in the kitchen to call my insurance agent about the boat policy. Dead air. No dial tone. Just a hollow static that sounded like the inside of an empty shell. I jiggled the cord. I checked the wall jack. Nothing. When Rachel arrived that morning, I mentioned it. She barely glanced up from her phone. Oh, the lines are down all over Cape Ann, she said. There was a nor'easter 2 nights ago. Took out the junction box on Atlantic Road. Repair crew will not be out until next week. There was no nor'easter. I have lived on this coast for 72 years. I know when the wind hits 40 knots because I feel it in my bones before the weather service ever issues a warning. The air that week was still and cold. No storm. No damage. Just a dead phone and a woman who lied about it the way other people breathe. Then the internet went dark. The little router in the hallway that Tommy had set up for me 2 years ago stopped blinking its green lights. Rachel said it was a service outage. She said it with that patient, slightly amused smile she used when she wanted me to feel old and incompetent. Just use the television, Dad. Watch your shows. We will get it sorted. I do not watch shows. I read tide charts online. I check the marine weather forecast. I email the harbor master about dock fees. Small things. Normal things. The things that keep a man connected to the world. All gone. Then came the locks. On the 4th day, I walked out the back door to check on the Mary Helen the way I do every morning. Down the wooden steps. Across the yard. To the dock gate. My key did not fit. The padlock had been replaced. New brass, shiny, still smelling of the hardware store. I stood there in the November wind holding my useless key, staring at a lock that did not recognize me on property I have owned for 40 years. Rachel explained it that afternoon. We had a security company come out, she said. For Maya's protection. You know she wanders. We cannot have her falling off the dock in the middle of the night. It is a liability issue, Dad. A liability issue. My dock. My water. My boat. Locked away from me. Behind brass and lies. She installed cameras next. Small white pods mounted above the front door. The back door. The garage. She said it was for everyone's safety. She said it was what the social worker recommended. But I noticed that every camera pointed inward. Not outward. They were not watching for intruders. They were watching me. I was being walled in. My phone, my internet, my dock, my freedom of movement. Each one taken away with a smile and a reasonable explanation. Each one a bar in a cage I could feel closing around me but could not prove to anyone who was not already inside it. Tommy did nothing. He drifted through the house like smoke, avoiding me, avoiding Rachel, avoiding the truth. When I cornered him in the upstairs hallway and demanded to know why my phone was cut, he shrugged. He said Rachel was handling it. He said I should rest. He said the word rest the way doctors say it when they mean stop fighting. I was alone in my own home, surrounded by people, watched by cameras, cut off from the world, a captain without a radio, a fisherman without his boat. But I was not idle. I watched. I listened. I catalogued every change, every lie, every small theft of my autonomy. And I began to notice something else. The tea. I drink Earl Grey every morning. Have done since Helen introduced me to it on our honeymoon in 1978. I know the taste the way a sommelier knows wine. The bergamot. The slight astringency. The warmth that spreads from your chest to your fingertips on a cold morning. On the 5th day, the tea tasted wrong. Not dramatically. Not like poison in a movie where the hero spits it out and gasps. It was subtle, a faint bitterness underneath the bergamot, like the ghost of a chemical trying to hide behind the flavor. If I were a man who gulped his tea while reading the paper, I might not have noticed. But I am a man who has survived 50 years on the Atlantic by paying attention to things that do not taste right. Bait that smells wrong. Water that looks too calm. Air that feels too heavy before a squall. I set the mug down. I did not drink it. I walked to the sink and poured it out slowly while Maya was in the bathroom. I watched the amber liquid swirl down the drain, and I thought about what kind of person puts something in an old man's morning tea. I thought about it all day. I thought about it while Rachel talked on the phone in the living room, her voice bright and performative. I thought about it while Maya sat in the corner reading a book she never turned the pages of. I thought about it while Tommy drank scotch in the kitchen at 2 in the afternoon. Someone in this house was poisoning me. Not fast, slow. The way rust eats a hull below the waterline. You do not see it until the day the boat simply does not float anymore. From that morning on, I stopped drinking anything I did not prepare myself. I stopped eating anything that came from Rachel's hands or Maya's hands. I poured the tea out every day, making a show of drinking it, pressing my lips to the rim but not swallowing. I kept crackers and peanut butter in my bedroom closet like a prisoner hiding rations, and I waited. Because I knew something they did not know. They had locked the dock. They had cut my phone. They had poisoned my tea. But they had forgotten one thing. The radio. The Mary Helen has a Marine VHF radio in her cabin. Channel 16 for emergencies. Channel 16B for the Brotherhood. It runs on its own battery. It does not need Wi-Fi. It does not need a phone line. It cannot be hacked by a smart home security system. It is as old and reliable as the tide itself. I just needed to get past that lock. And I knew every weak point in that dock gate, because I built it with my own 2 hands in 1986. I just needed to wait for my window. And on the sea, patience is not a virtue. It is survival. On the 6th morning, I got my chance to search. Rachel called at 8 to say she had a meeting in Salem and would not be back until afternoon. Tommy had driven to Boston the night before for what he called a work emergency. That left me and Maya alone in the house. I waited until I heard the shower running in the guest bathroom. The pipes in this house are old. They groan and rattle when the water hits full pressure. I knew I had 10 minutes, maybe 12 if she washed her hair. I moved faster than my body wanted me to. Down the hall to the guest room. The door was open. The room smelled of cheap vanilla perfume and something chemical underneath it. Her duffel bag was on the bed, half unzipped, clothes spilling out of it like the guts of a gutted fish. I searched with the efficiency of a man who has organized gear lockers on boats for half a century. Every item has a place. Every irregularity stands out. I lifted the clothes. Jeans. Too big. A sweater with pills along the seams. Underwear still in a plastic drugstore package. At the bottom, beneath a dirty towel rolled into a tight cylinder, I found it. An orange prescription bottle. the kind with the child-proof cap that is not actually child-proof for anyone over 10. I held it up to the light from the window. The label was crisp, fresh, printed yesterday or the day before. Patient: Eugene Kowalski. Prescribing physician: Dr. Alan Whitfield. Medication: lithium carbonate. 300 milligrams. Take twice daily with food. I read it again. Then a third time. My hands did not shake. They were steady the way they are steady when you are pulling a man out of the water and there is no time for fear. I have never met a Dr. Alan Whitfield. I have never been prescribed lithium. I have never had a psychiatric evaluation in my life. My doctor is old Pete Harrington on Main Street. And the last thing he prescribed me was a stronger dosage of blood pressure medication 3 months ago. Lithium. I knew what it was. You spend enough years around men who come back from the sea changed, broken by storms and solitude and grief, and you learn the names of the drugs that are meant to quiet the mind. Lithium is for bipolar disorder, for mania. In high doses or improperly administered, it causes confusion, tremors, slurred speech, memory loss. It mimics dementia. It turns a sharp man dull. It turns a captain into cargo. 300 milligrams twice daily. That was not a therapeutic dose for a man my size. That was a chemical leash. Enough to fog my brain over weeks until I could not remember my own name. Until I sat in a chair staring at the wall while Rachel told social workers how sad it was that Dad could not recognize his own family anymore. I put the bottle back exactly where I found it. Twisted the towel the same way. Smoothed the clothes over top. Left the room. The shower was still running. I had 3 minutes to spare. I sat at the kitchen table with my cold tea, and I thought. The picture was clear now. This was not just a con to steal the house. This was a medical kidnapping. They were going to drug me into incompetence, have me declared unfit, take power of attorney, and strip mine everything I had built in 72 years of life. The house, the dock, the 2 rental properties downtown, the savings account I had not touched since Helen died. And once they had it all, once I was a drooling shell in some facility that smelled of bleach and despair, I would be useless, expensive to maintain, a liability, as Rachel liked to say. I wondered how long after that before I had an accident. A fall in the shower, a wrong dose, a quiet death that nobody investigated too hard because the old man was already gone in every way that mattered. Rachel came back at 4. She was carrying a manila folder, and wearing that shark smile she reserves for negotiations she has already won. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and placed the folder between us with the same deliberate precision a card dealer uses in a casino. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk about the future." I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. "The social worker is coming Monday," she continued. "They are going to assess whether this home is safe for Maya and for you. Given your episodes lately, your confusion, your memory lapses, I think it would be best if we formalize some arrangements now, before Monday, so we can show them we are being proactive." She opened the folder. Inside was a single document. "Power of attorney. Temporary," she said. "Just for medical and financial decisions. Just until the doctor clears you. It protects you, Dad. It means we can make sure your prescriptions are managed properly. It means nobody takes advantage of you. Nobody takes advantage." She said this with a straight face while a bottle of drugs I never asked for sat hidden 20 feet away in a duffel bag full of lies. I looked at the paper. I looked at her. I measured the angles. The way you measure wind speed against current before setting a course. If I refused, she would know I was alert. She would know the fog was not settling the way she planned. She would accelerate. She would push harder. She might do something drastic before I was ready. If I signed, I gave her a piece of paper. A temporary one. And I bought time. Time to reach the radio. Time to call for help. Time to set my own trap. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled. Not from fear. From the effort it took. Not to drive it through the document and into the table. I signed. Rachel took the paper. She smiled. She patted my hand the way you pat a dog that finally sits on command. Good, Dad. This is the right thing. You will see. She left at 5. The house went quiet. I stood at the kitchen window staring out at the dock. The Mary Helen was right there, 60 feet away, behind one padlock on a gate I had built myself 38 years ago. I knew that gate. I knew the post it was bolted to was soft with rot at the base. I knew that a determined man with a pry bar and 15 minutes of privacy could pop the whole assembly free without touching the lock at all. I just needed Rachel gone. I needed Maya asleep. I needed one window of opportunity, and I was going to get it. Because the tide does not wait for permission. It comes when it comes. And mine was coming soon. Wednesday. Rachel drove to Boston for what she called a developer meeting. I watched her black SUV disappear down Atlantic Road from the upstairs window. Then I watched for another 10 minutes to make sure she did not circle back. A shark sometimes doubles around to check if the bait is still bleeding. Maya was in the living room. The television was on. Some daytime talk show with voices loud enough to cover the sound of a 72-year-old man walking to his garage. I moved through the back hallway. My hip was bad that morning, stiff from the cold and from days of forced inactivity. But pain is just information. You acknowledge it, and you move on. I reached the garage. It smelled the way it always does. Motor oil and sawdust and the ghost of 1,000 projects completed in solitude. My workbench was exactly as I left it. My tools hung on their pegboard, in the order I established 30 years ago. Rachel had not touched this space. It was too dirty for her, too beneath her attention. I grabbed the pry bar from the bottom rack. It was 18 inches of flat steel, heavy and cold. I had used it to pop barnacles off the hull of the Mary Helen. Today it had a different purpose. I went out the side door of the garage, the one that faces the water, hidden from the kitchen windows by the hedge Helen planted in '92. The dock gate was 20 feet ahead. I could hear the Mary Helen creaking in her slip, the gentle knock of her hull against the rubber bumpers. She was waiting for me. The padlock was new, brass, expensive. But the gatepost it was bolted to was not. That post had been standing in salt air and wet soil for 38 years. I had noticed the rot at the base last summer and made a mental note to replace it. I never did. Thank God for procrastination. I wedged the pry bar between the gate frame and the post at the lowest point, where the wood was soft and dark with moisture. I leaned my weight into it. The wood groaned. It protested. Then it gave. The bolts pulled free from the rotted timber like teeth from a diseased jaw. The gate swung open, padlock still attached but meaningless. Like a locked door on a house with no walls. I stepped onto the dock. The boards were slick with morning dew and salt. I walked carefully, using my cane for balance, until I reached the Mary Helen. I grabbed the rail and pulled myself aboard. My feet hit the deck and something inside me unclenched. This was my territory. My kingdom. The one place on earth where I was still the captain, and nobody could tell me otherwise. I ducked into the wheelhouse. It was cramped and cold. The instruments were dark. The diesel engine was winterized and silent. But in the corner, mounted on the bulkhead above the chart table, was the VHF radio. Marine band. Battery-powered. Independent of every system Rachel had shut down. I flipped the power switch. The unit hummed to life. The display glowed a dim orange. I checked the battery gauge. 60%. Enough for what I needed. I turned the dial to channel 16B, the Brotherhood frequency. It was not an official channel. It was a gentleman's agreement among the old captains of Gloucester. A frequency we kept for ourselves back when the fishing grounds were more dangerous and the Coast Guard was always 20 minutes too late. I pressed the transmit button. My voice sounded strange to me. It had been days since I had spoken to anyone who was not my enemy. This is Mary Helen calling Captain DeLuca. Frank. Pick up. It is Jean. Static. The hiss of empty airwaves. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. I was about to try again when the speaker crackled. Jean Kowalski. The voice was like gravel poured over iron. Deep, rough, stained with decades of cigarettes and sea salt. I thought you sank years ago. What is the occasion? Frank DeLuca. 74 years old. Retired captain of the fishing vessel Iron Lady. Former maritime investigator for the Port Authority. Before that, the man had spent 30 years chasing smugglers, insurance frauds, and labor violations up and down the New England coast. If anyone could untangle this net, it was Frank. I talked fast. I told him everything. The girl, the compass, the birth certificate from Portland, Rachel's isolation tactics, the lithium in the tea, the power of attorney. I did not embellish. I did not dramatize. I gave him the facts the way you give a weather report. Clear, sequential, urgent. Frank listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the flick of his lighter. You are in deep water, Jean, he said finally. The exhale of smoke crackled through the speaker. Your daughter-in-law, Rachel Voss, maiden name. I know that name. She had her law license pulled 2 years ago. Ethics violation. Client, trust fund embezzlement. The state bar buried it quiet because the firm paid restitution. But the record is there if you know where to look. She is leveraged bad, Jean. Word on the street is she owes north of $200,000 to people who do not send polite letters. My jaw tightened. $200,000. That explained the urgency. That explained the speed of this operation. She was not just greedy. She was desperate. And desperate people are the most dangerous kind. What do I do, Frank? First, he said, his voice dropping low. Do not eat or drink a single thing that woman or that girl prepares. Not water. Not coffee. Not a cracker. You hear me? Lithium toxicity in a man your age can cause renal failure. She is not just making you look confused. She is poisoning your organs. Over time, this kills you. And it looks natural. I gripped the radio handset so hard the plastic creaked under my fingers. Second, Frank continued, I need time. Give me 48 hours. I will run the girl through every database I still have access to. I will pull the birth certificate filing records from Maine, and I will find out who Dr. Alan Whitfield is, because I guarantee you that name is attached to a prescription mill, not a medical practice. Sit tight, play dumb, and stay alive. I copied that, I said. 48 hours. I turned off the radio. I sat in the captain's chair for a moment, my hands resting on the wheel I had held through 1,000 storms. The leather was cracked and cold, but it felt more like home than anything inside that house. I climbed off the boat. I walked back through the broken gate. I leaned the post back into position as best I could, propping a rock against its base to keep it upright. From 10 feet away, it looked intact. It would fool Rachel's cameras if she checked the footage. It would not fool a strong wind, but I only needed it to hold until Friday. I walked back toward the house. I pushed open the back door and stepped into the kitchen. Maya was standing at the counter. She was holding a glass of water. She turned when she heard me. Her eyes went to my boots. They were wet, flecked with salt and dock grime. She looked at my hands. There was a splinter of rotted wood caught under my thumbnail. She did not say a word. She just looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then she set the glass down and walked past me into the living room. She knew. She had to know. But she said nothing, and I did not know yet whether her silence was a threat or a mercy. 2 days passed. 2 days of performing weakness while watching for signs. And on the second morning, I noticed it. The tea was clean. I did not trust it at first. I made my cup the way I always do. Boiled the kettle. Dropped the bag. Let it steep 3 minutes. Then I brought it to my lips and breathed in the steam before sipping. Bergamot. Tannin. Warmth. No bitterness. No chemical ghost lurking beneath the flavor. I took a small sip. Held it on my tongue, the way a man tests water from an unfamiliar well. Nothing. It tasted exactly the way Earl Grey is supposed to taste, the way it tasted before this nightmare began. I glanced at Maya. She was at the counter making toast. She did not look at me, but her shoulders were tight. Her movements were too careful, too deliberate, as though she was trying very hard not to turn around. She had stopped. She had reduced the dose or eliminated it entirely. The question was why. If her handler had told her to keep drugging me, and she stopped on her own, that meant one of two things. Either she was changing the plan, or she was changing sides. I did not know which. Not yet. But I filed it away. Another data point. Another shift in the current. That afternoon, Rachel took Maya to a doctor's appointment. Some fabricated checkup to maintain the story of the fragile, traumatized daughter. They left at 1. I had the house to myself. I did not go to the boat this time. I did not need to. Because sitting on the kitchen table, placed exactly in the center where I could not miss it, was a spiral notebook. It was cheap. The kind you buy at a dollar store. Blue cover, bent corners, a coffee ring on the front. It was open, face up, turned to a page filled with small, hurried handwriting. I stood over it for a long moment. My instinct said, do not touch it. My instinct said it was a trap. Another layer of the performance designed to manipulate me. But something about the placement felt different. It was not hidden. It was not tucked away in a bag or shoved under a mattress. It was displayed. Left in the open the way a sailor leaves a distress flag hanging where someone might see it. I sat down. I put on my reading glasses. And I read. The first entry was dated 3 weeks ago, October 7th. The woman in the black car came to my apartment again. She says she has work for me. Says I have the right look. She wants me to play a role, a daughter, a lost girl. She says it pays $100,000 cash. $100,000. That is enough for Mama's next 3 months at Shady Grove. That is enough to keep her in the memory unit where they know her name. I told the woman yes. God forgive me. I told her yes. I turned the page. The handwriting changed as the entries progressed. It became tighter, more frantic. October 14th. She gave me the script. A full dossier on the old man. His habits. His house layout. His wife's name. And what she loved. I have to memorize everything. She says he is mean and stubborn, and sitting on a fortune he refuses to share with his own son. She says this is justice. But it does not feel like justice. It feels like theft. I practice the lines in front of my bathroom mirror, and I cannot look myself in the eye. I kept reading. My chest was tightening with each page. Not with anger. With something else. Something I had not expected. October 21st. I met the son today. Tommy. He is weak. He does whatever she says. He looks at me like I am furniture. But the wife, Rachel, she looks at me like I am something she bought at a store and might return if I do not perform well enough. She scares me. When she smiles, nothing moves behind her eyes. And then the entry from 5 days ago. The ink was smudged, warped by moisture, tears, or rain. November 3rd. Something is wrong. She changed the deal. She gave me papers to sign. Insurance forms, she said, for my protection. But I read them when she was not looking. It is a life insurance policy. On me, why would she insure someone she just met? And then she told me that after the court hearing, After the old man is put in the facility, I need to go away for a while. She said she booked me a trip, somewhere warm. She said it like a gift, but the way she said go away, it did not sound like a vacation. It sounded like a hole in the ground. I am scared. I think I made a deal with someone who does not let people walk away. If something happens to me, whoever reads this, please tell my mother I tried. Tell Martha Torres at Shady Grove Memory Care that her daughter tried to save her. I am sorry, Mama. I am so sorry. I closed the notebook. My hands were flat on the table, steady. But inside my chest, something was rearranging itself. The way the wind shifts before a squall, and suddenly everything you thought you knew about the weather is wrong. Maya Torres. That was her name. Not the stranger. Not the enemy. A daughter trying to save her mother from the slow erasure of Alzheimer's. A woman so desperate she walked into a con she did not fully understand. And now she was trapped in the same net I was, hooked by the same predator. Rachel had not hired a partner. She had hired a pawn. And pawns get sacrificed first. I thought about the insurance policy. I thought about the word disappear. I thought about how easy it would be to overdose a young woman with a history of instability and call it suicide. 2 birds. 1 stone. The old man dies confused in a facility. The girl dies alone in some motel. Rachel collects on both policies and walks away clean. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it. Same page. Same angle. Same coffee ring facing the window. Maya had left it here on purpose. She had placed it where I would find it. Because she could not say the words out loud. Because the cameras were watching. Because Rachel had her so frightened she could not even whisper the truth. She was sending me a signal. A distress call. The only one she could send. And I received it. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Maya was in her room. I could hear nothing through the walls. But I knew she was awake. I knew she was lying in the dark, wondering if the old man had read her diary. Wondering if he understood. Wondering if he would help her or turn her in. I was not going to turn her in. I was not going to confront her either. Not yet. Not with Rachel's cameras recording every room. I needed to speak to her in a way that no microphone could capture. I needed a language that only she would understand. And I knew exactly what it was. A piece of rope. A simple test. A knot that means you belong to the water. Tomorrow night. When Rachel was gone and the house was dark, I was going to sit across from Maya Torres. And I was going to offer her the only thing that might save us both. A chance to tie a different knot. Thursday night. Rachel left at 8. Tommy was in Boston. The house was ours. I waited until 9. I wanted the darkness to settle. I wanted the streetlight on Atlantic Road to be the only glow reaching the kitchen windows. When the house was quiet enough to hear the tide turning, I went downstairs. Maya was at the kitchen table. Compass in front of her. Magazine open to a page she had not turned in an hour. She looked up when I walked in. Her eyes went to my hands immediately. I was carrying a length of rope. 3 feet of braided nylon from the Mary Helen. I set it on the table between us. It landed softly. Just a piece of rope, but in that moment it might as well have been a verdict. She stared at it. Her face went pale. I sat down. Folded my hands. My voice was low and steady. The voice I use in a gale. "Tie me a fisherman's knot," I said. A real one. She did not move. Tears spilled over her lashes and ran down her cheeks. She did not wipe them. She just stared at the rope with the face of someone who has been carrying a lie too heavy for her spine. "You cannot tie it," I said. "Because you have never lived near the ocean. Because your name is Maya Torres, and your mother is in a memory care facility, and you owe $60,000 you do not have." She covered her face. Her shoulders shook. The kind of crying that comes when someone finally says, "You can put it down." I gave her a moment. Then I continued. "I read your diary. You left it open because you wanted me to find it. You are smarter than she thinks. When her breathing steadied, she lowered her hands. Her mascara was running. She looked young, terrified. Are you going to call the police? She whispered. No. Why? Because if I call tonight, Rachel panics. A panicked shark does not swim away. It bites everything in the water, including you. She stared at me. I could see her measuring me the same way I had measured her that first morning. She is going to kill me, Maya said. Her voice was flat, not dramatic, factual. She has insurance on me. She told me I was going to Mexico after the court date. But there is no flight. I checked. There is no booking. She is going to make me disappear. I know, I said. I read that part too. Then what do we do? Her knuckles were white on the table edge. I cannot go to the police. I committed fraud. I lied to the Coast Guard. If I talk, I go to prison, and my mother dies alone. I leaned forward, looked her in the eye. She was not a con artist. She was a daughter. Desperate, foolish, brave, in the wrong direction. Here is what we do, I said. You go back to being her puppet. You smile. You nod. You take the pills she gives you and hide them under your tongue. You make her believe you are obedient and grateful. And you? She asked. I stay the confused old man. I shuffle and mumble. I am exactly what she needs me to be, until the trap is ready. What trap? I let the corner of my mouth lift. The look a captain gets when he spots the school he has been tracking for 3 days. Rachel is greedy, I said. That is her weakness. Greedy people cannot resist a bigger prize. They will reach for it, even when their hand is already inside something with teeth. I told her the plan. The Maritime Fishermen's Compensation Fund. $2 million from a class action settlement 20 years ago. A trust accessible only by a verified blood heir. All of it. Fiction. All of it bait. She will hear about this money, I said. I will make sure of it. She will push for a DNA test. She will push for a signing. She will walk into a room full of cameras and federal agents and hand them the evidence herself, because her greed will not allow her to walk away from $2 million. Maya was quiet for a long time. She touched the rope with one finger, tracing the braid. Will it work? She asked. I have been catching things that fight back for 50 years. Bluefin, swordfish, storms that could swallow a city. Rachel is dangerous, but she is just a bigger fish, and every fish has a hook size. Something shifted behind her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. Beside, it was something harder. What do you need from me? I need you inside. Find where she keeps documents. Find her phone when she leaves it charging. And when the day comes, walk into that room. Sign the paper. Let her think she has won. And then I pull the net closed. Maya took a long breath. She sat up straight and nodded once. Hard. Final. Okay. But when this is over, you help my mother. I do not want the 100,000. I never wanted it. I just want Mama safe. I reached across the table, took her hand. Hers was small and cold. Mine was rough from 50 years of rope and salt. We held on for a moment. A pact. A union forged, not by blood, but by necessity. Kid, I said. When this is over, I will pay every bill until the balance reads 0. She squeezed my hand. Let go. Picked up the rope. Turned it over in her fingers. Will you teach me? She asked quietly. The knot. The real one. For when this is over, I nodded. First we survive, I said. Then we learn knots. She put the rope in her pocket. Stood up. Wiped her face. Walked back to the guest room. Her footsteps were different now. Lighter. The steps of someone no longer carrying the weight alone. I sat in the dark kitchen. Listened to the tide. For the first time since 3:47 that morning, I did not feel like a man under siege. I felt like a captain with a crew. 2 days after the alliance, I went back to being invisible. I shuffled. I mumbled. I stared at the television without seeing it. I asked Maya what day it was. Twice. In 1 hour. I let Rachel catch me wearing mismatched socks and looking confused about which cabinet held the coffee mugs. The performance cost me nothing. Pride is a luxury when survival is on the table. Saturday evening, Rachel announced a family dinner. She said it with that bright, brittle enthusiasm she used when she wanted something documented. She wanted the picture, the happy family gathered around the table, the dutiful daughter-in-law caring for the aging patriarch. In case the social worker asked. In case the court needed proof. She cooked. Grilled salmon and roasted potatoes. She used Helen's good plates, the blue ones with the hand-painted anchors that Helen found at an antique shop in Rockport. Seeing Rachel's manicured fingers on those plates made my jaw tight, but I said nothing. I sat at the head of the table because she directed me there, positioning me like furniture for a photograph. Tommy was to my right. He had driven back from Boston that afternoon. He looked thinner than last week. Grayer. He was drinking wine before the food was served, filling his glass the way a man fills a hole he cannot see the bottom of. Maya sat to my left. She was wearing a dress Rachel had bought her. Something floral and stiff that did not match her frame. She kept her head down. Obedient. Quiet. Playing her part perfectly. Rachel sat at the other end. She was talking about the renovation plans she had for the kitchen. My kitchen. She was talking about knocking out the wall between the dining room and the living room to create an open concept. She said open concept the way a pastor says salvation. Like it was something that would fix everything broken. I let her talk. I ate the salmon slowly. I had watched her prepare it from start to finish, never leaving the kitchen, so I knew it was clean. I chewed and nodded and looked vaguely pleasant. And then, between bites, I dropped the bait. I looked up from my plate. I squinted at the wall above the fireplace, where Helen's painting of Gloucester Harbor hung in its heavy frame. I pointed at it with my fork. Helen always said we should sell that painting, I mumbled. Put the money toward the fund. Rachel did not look up immediately. She was cutting her salmon into precise squares. What fund, Dad? She asked. Her voice was casual. Disinterested. I blinked. Looked confused. Shook my head. The fund, I said. The fisherman's fund. The compensation thing. From the lawsuit. Tommy looked at me. What lawsuit, Dad? I waved my hand vaguely. The class action. Back in 2003. The engine company. They settled with the captains whose boats had the defective diesels. The Mary Helen had one of those engines. Blew a gasket in '01. Nearly killed me and Frank DeLuca. I paused. Took a sip of water. Scratched my head like I was trying to catch a memory that was swimming away from me. They put the money in a trust. A maritime trust. Cannot touch it until you have a verified heir sign for it. Something about tax shelters and estate law. Helen always said we should just leave it for Tommy. But the paperwork. I trailed off. Shook my head again. The paperwork is complicated. Rachel had stopped cutting her salmon. Her knife was resting on the plate. She was looking at me now. Not with the usual disdain. With focus. Sharp, predatory focus. How much, Dad? She asked. Her voice was still casual, but I could hear the vibration underneath. The frequency of hunger. I frowned. Squinted at the ceiling. Like I was doing math I could not quite manage. The settlement was split among the captains. My share with interest. I think it is around 2 million now. Give or take. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. I could hear the wind outside pressing against the windows. I could hear Rachel's breath catch in her throat. $2 million. I watched her from the corner of my eye while pretending to be fascinated by a potato on my fork. She was frozen. her fingers gripping the knife and fork like weapons. Her eyes were calculating. I could almost see the numbers running behind them. 2 million, minus her debts, minus what she owed. That left more than enough to buy her way out of every hole she had dug. Tommy shifted in his seat. Dad, how come you never mentioned this before? I shrugged. Did not seem important. Cannot access it anyway. Need a blood relative to sign at the Maritime Federal Credit Union downtown. Some rule about direct heirs and verified documentation. Helen and I never bothered because we figured Tommy would handle it when I was gone. I paused. Looked at Maya. Looked at her with soft, watery eyes. The eyes of a guilty old man seeing redemption. But now, I said quietly, now there is Maya, my daughter, my blood. She could sign for it, if she is verified, if the paperwork goes through. Maya kept her head down. She did not look at Rachel. She did not need to. We both knew Rachel was already running the calculations, already seeing the path. DNA test. Verification. Signing. $2 million flowing through her fingers like water through a net. Rachel cleared her throat. She set her silverware down. Her hands were perfectly still. Steady. But I knew steady. I know the difference between calm and controlled. She was vibrating beneath the surface. Well, she said. Her voice was silk over steel. That is certainly something to discuss with the lawyers. We should look into it. For Maya's sake. Of course. It is her birthright. Her birthright. The phrase made me want to laugh, but I just nodded. Looked confused again. Went back to my potato. The rest of dinner passed in small talk and silence. Rachel was distracted. She cleared the plates mechanically, her mind already elsewhere, already scheming, already reaching for the hook. That night, after Tommy went to bed and Maya retreated to her room, I sat in my armchair in the dark. I was not sleeping. I was listening. At 11:15, I heard Rachel's voice from the guest bathroom downstairs. She was on the phone. The exhaust fan was running, but her voice cut through it. Sharp, with urgency. 2 million, she said. In a maritime trust. He says it needs a blood heir to sign. We need that DNA verification pushed through this week. Call the lab. Tell them I will double the fee if they expedite. And get me a meeting at Maritime Federal Credit Union for Friday. Friday at the latest. A pause. Then her voice dropped lower. Harder. I do not care what it costs. We are running out of time. The social worker comes Monday. If we do not have control of everything by then, this whole thing falls apart. I heard the phone click. The fan turned off. Her heels tapped down the hallway and out the front door. The engine of her SUV started. She was leaving. Going to make arrangements. Moving pieces on a board she thought only she could see. I smiled in the dark. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who has watched a fish take the bait and start to run, not knowing the hook is already set in the jaw. Friday. She wanted Friday. That gave me 5 days. 5 days to build the net. 5 days to position the boat. 5 days to make sure that when Rachel walked into that room with her forged documents and her stolen daughter, she would be walking straight into the deepest water she had ever known, and there would be no swimming back. Tuesday. 3 days before the net closed, I went to the boat at dawn, while Maya made a show of sleeping late for the cameras. The sky was iron gray, and the wind smelled of ice. Winter was coming early this year. I could feel it in the way the gulls circled low, staying close to the rooftops instead of riding the thermals out over the water. I powered on the radio. Channel 16B. Pressed. Transmit. Frank. It is Jean. I need your report. The response came fast. He had been waiting. That told me something. When Frank waits by the radio, it means the news is heavy. Jean. I have what you need. But there is something else. Something you are not going to like. Give me the good first. The birth certificate is a forgery. Frank's voice was steady, professional. The filing number does not match Maine's registry for 93. The paper stock is wrong. It was printed on a laser printer, not a dot matrix like the state used back then. Any competent forensic examiner will tear it apart in 10 minutes. Good. What about the lab? Found it. A clinic in Revere. Run by a man named Patel, who lost his medical license in 2018 for falsifying blood work for insurance scams. Rachel paid him $12,000 cash to produce a positive DNA match between you and the girl. He still has the records. And he is very interested in cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for not going back to prison. I exhaled. That was the nail. That was the evidence that turned a civil dispute into a federal felony. Rachel had not just lied. She had purchased a fraudulent medical document. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Each count carrying a decade. Now tell me the bad, I said. Frank paused. The static on the line hissed like the sea between swells. I could hear him light a cigarette. The inhale was long and deliberate. Jean, I ran your name through the Portland Hospital database. I still have a contact in medical records up there. A nurse who owes me from the dock workers case in '09. Get to it, Frank. You were admitted to Maine Medical Center on March 15, 1993. Dehydration and alcohol poisoning. You were there for 2 days. The emergency contact listed was a woman named Linda Marsh, 26 years old. Local address in South Portland. I closed my eyes. The wheelhouse was cold, but I felt colder. The name hit me like a rogue wave in a flat sea. Linda. I had not heard that name in 30 years. I had buried it so deep, I thought it was gone. But you cannot bury things in the ocean. The current always brings them back. There is more, Frank said. His voice was gentle now. Careful. The way you speak to a man standing on a ledge. Linda Marsh gave birth at that same hospital on November 19, 1993. 8 months after your admission. The birth record lists father as unknown. But your name is in the hospital visitor log 3 days after the birth. You were there, Jean. You saw the baby. The wheelhouse spun around me. I gripped the edge of the chart table. My knuckles went white. The brass fittings blurred. I remembered. God help me. I remembered. Helen and I were fighting that year. She wanted to sell the boat. I wanted to keep fishing. I was drinking too much. I took a job in Portland for 6 weeks, crewing on a cargo ship that needed a captain for a short haul. I was lonely and angry and soaked in whiskey every night at a bar near the waterfront. And there was a woman, dark hair. Quiet laugh. She did not ask me questions about home. 1 night became 3. 3 became a week. Then the job ended, and I went back to Gloucester. And I never spoke to her again. I never called. I never wrote. I told myself it was nothing, a mistake made in fog. But there was a baby. There was a child. Jean. Frank said. The child's name was Sarah Marsh. She grew up in South Portland with her mother. Linda died in 2005. Breast cancer. Sarah was 12. I pressed my forehead against the cold metal of the radio housing. Sarah. I had a daughter. A real one. Not the fiction Rachel had constructed. A living, breathing girl who grew up without me because I was too much of a coward to look back. Frank continued. His voice was heavy. Sarah Marsh died on August 14, 2010. Single vehicle accident on I-95 near Kennebunk. She was 17. The sound that came out of me was not a word. It was not a sob. It was something deeper. Something from the hull of me. A groan of timber under pressure that cannot hold. 17. She was 17 years old. She never made it to 18. She never got to be an adult. And I never knew her name. Until this moment. I sat in the captain's chair. The leather was cracked and frozen beneath me. I stared at the instruments I could not see. The gray light through the wheelhouse windows made everything look like a photograph of a life that belonged to someone else. Jean. Frank's voice cut through the static. I know this is bad. But listen to me. This is why Rachel chose Portland. She did not pick it at random. Someone tipped her off that you had a past there. She used your real guilt to build a fake story. She does not know Sarah is dead. She does not know the DNA will not match. She thinks she found your weakness, and she is right. But your weakness is also your weapon. How? I managed. My voice was raw, because you cannot be the man who says I never had a daughter. She took that defense away from you. But you can be the man who says prove it. Let her run the fake test. Let her produce the rigged results. And when the FBI compares those results against the actual hospital records from Portland, the fraud will be undeniable. She rigged a test for a girl who is not Sarah. And Sarah is dead. The math does not work. The whole thing collapses. I sat there for a long time. The boat rocked gently beneath me. The harbor sounds filtered in. Creaking lines. Distant engines. The cry of gulls. I thought about Sarah. A girl with dark hair like her mother. Growing up in Portland without a father. Riding her bicycle on streets I would never see. Dying on a highway I had driven 100 times without knowing she was buried in the earth beside it. I am sorry, I whispered. Not to Frank. Not to anyone who could hear me. To the girl I never looked for. To the ghost I did not know I was carrying. Then I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I straightened up. I put both hands on the wheel of the Mary Helen. The wood was worn smooth by decades of my grip. I had a debt I could never repay. But I could make sure the woman who had weaponized my guilt paid for it. And I could make sure Maya, the living girl who had been placed in my house as a surrogate for the dead daughter I never knew, survived this. Friday, I said into the radio. We move Friday. Set the trap. Call your contact at the bureau. I want agents in that room when she walks in. Sequel. Copy that, Frank said. Friday. Stay alive until then, old man. I turned off the radio. I climbed off the boat. The November air bit my face. I walked back toward the house carrying a grief I had not earned the right to feel, but carrying it anyway, because that is what fathers do. Even the failed ones. The clock satisfies no one. It moves at its own pace, indifferent to the man watching it. Wednesday morning I sat at Helen's kitchen table with a mug of black coffee brewed by my own hand, poured from my own kettle, and counted the hours. 72 until Friday. 72 hours to build a bank that didn't exist, staff it with ghosts, and convince a shark she was swimming into open water when she was really entering a net. Frank's voice crackled through the VHF at 6 sharp. Confirmed. Agent Morales, FBI Financial Crimes, Boston Field Office. She's in. Needs your statement by tonight. I copied the address he gave me onto a scrap of newspaper margin. A P.O. box in Rockport. Old school. No digital trail for Rachel's lawyers to sniff. The storefront? I asked. Leased yesterday. 14 Harbor Lane, 2nd floor above the bait shop. Gus owes me from the 94 Nor'easter. He's not asking questions. Frank paused. Jean, Morales says if Rachel doesn't physically attempt to access the funds, they can't charge wire fraud. She has to sign. She has to present ID. She has to try to walk out with money. She will, I said. Trust me. She will. By noon, the Brotherhood moved like a tide nobody sees. Gus cleared the 2nd floor office. His nephew, an electrician, ran fresh wiring for 3 concealed cameras, one behind a framed photograph of a schooner, one inside a smoke detector, one in the base of a desk lamp. Frank sourced a brass nameplate. Maritime Federal Credit. Union established. 1987. It looked 40 years old because it was. He'd pulled it from a decommissioned credit union in New Bedford that went under during the savings and loan crisis. I wrote my statement for Agent Morales that evening. 4 pages, longhand. Every date, every pill, every camera. Rachel installed in my own house. I sealed it in an envelope, drove to Rockport in Helen's old Volvo, the one Rachel hadn't thought to track, and dropped it in the P.O. box, under a sky so clear the stars looked angry. Thursday. 48 hours. Maya called Rachel at 9:15, exactly as we rehearsed. I listened from the hallway on a prepaid phone Frank had delivered inside a bait bucket. "He's getting worse," Maya said, her voice pitched with manufactured worry. "He keeps talking about the fund. Says he wants to go Friday morning, sign everything over before he forgets again." Rachel's reply was instant. No pause. No breath. "Friday works. I'll have the paperwork ready. Tell him I'll drive." Maya glanced at me through the kitchen doorway. I gave a single nod. "One more thing," Maya added. "He mentioned a notary has to witness. Someone from the credit union." "I'll handle it," Rachel said. The line went dead. That afternoon I watched from the upstairs window as a black sedan I didn't recognize parked 2 houses down. It sat there for 11 minutes, then left. Rachel checking the perimeter, measuring her confidence. Good. Confidence is what walks a person straight into a trap. Thursday night, Frank radioed one last time. "Morales has 2 agents inside. One plays the branch manager name tag, says Clifford Hayes. The other sits at a teller window. They've got the fake account screens loaded on a laptop, routing numbers, balance confirmations, the whole theater. And the check? Certified cashier's check. Pre-printed. 500,000. It's real paper stock. Treasury, watermark, magnetic ink. Serial number flags the moment anyone tries to deposit it. She won't get 3 blocks. I closed my eyes. Helen used to say, "The sea doesn't punish it, simply reveals what was always underneath." Rachel thought she was the current. She was about to learn she was the debris. Friday morning. 0 hour. I dressed in my good flannel, the one Helen ironed the last Sunday she was strong enough to stand. I tucked the compass into my breast pocket, not for evidence, but for courage. Maya braided her hair, wore the silver earrings Rachel had bought her as costume pieces for the daughter role. We looked like a family heading to a financial appointment. That was the point. Rachel arrived at 08. 30 inches. A rented Mercedes. She wore a charcoal suit, heels that clicked against my porch like a metronome, counting down her freedom. Tommy sat in the passenger seat. Pale. Silent. A man who had long since stopped steering his own vessel. "Ready?" Rachel smiled. White teeth. Perfect posture. A predator. Dressed for church. "Ready," I said. The drive to 14 Harbor Lane took 7 minutes. Nobody spoke. The radio played soft jazz. Rachel's choice. Always Rachel's choice. I watched Gloucester pass outside the window. The fish market, the memorial statue, the harbor where I'd spent 50 years learning that patience is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. We parked. Rachel checked her lipstick in the mirror. Maya squeezed my hand once quick, invisible. A current between 2 people who had chosen each other. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the brass nameplate above the bait shop entrance. Maritime Federal Credit Union. It gleamed in the Friday sun, like a lure breaking the surface. Inside, everything was perfect. The oak desk, the leather chairs, the soft hum of an air conditioner that had been installed 48 hours ago. Clifford Hayes stood and extended his hand. "Mr. Kowalski, we've been expecting you." Rachel walked in behind me. Her heels crossed the threshold. The net was closed. The office smelled like fresh paint and old money. Someone, probably Gus's nephew, had sprayed the walls with a chemical that mimicked decades of oak polish and paper dust. It worked. Rachel inhaled through her nose the way a sommelier breathes over a glass, and I watched her shoulders drop half an inch. Relaxed. Trusting. Perfect. Clifford Hayes gestured toward 2 leather chairs facing the desk. "Please, have a seat. Can I offer coffee?" Water, water, Rachel said. Sparkling. If you have it. She settled into the chair like she owned it already. Tommy stood near the door, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes on the floor. My son. My blood. Reduced to a coat rack in his own wife's theater. I didn't look at him too long. Couldn't afford the distraction. Maya sat beside me. Her posture straight. Her breathing controlled. Underneath the table, her left hand pressed flat against her thigh, the signal we'd agreed on. Steady. No panic. Hayes opened a leather binder. Inside, 6 pages of documents, each bearing the Maritime Federal Credit Union letterhead that Frank had sourced from a dead institution's archives. Routing numbers. Account histories dating back to 2003. A trust summary showing $2,147,000 held in escrow under the Kowalski Maritime Workers Settlement. Mr. Kowalski, Hayes began, his voice measured and warm-trained, I realized, trained by years of undercover work to sound like the kind of man who manages your retirement and remembers your grandchildren's names. As we discussed by phone, the trust requires a verified blood relative beneficiary to authorize disbursement. Your daughter, he nodded toward Maya, will need to provide her signature on pages 3 and 6, along with a thumbprint on the notarial seal. Rachel leaned forward. And the initial disbursement timeline? Hayes didn't miss a beat. Once signatures are verified, and the DNA confirmation is logged, which I understand was completed. Tuesday funds transfer within 72 business hours. However, he paused, adjusted his glasses given the size of the trust. We do offer an advance option, a certified check, drawn today, for up to $500,000 against the total balance. I watched Rachel's pupils dilate. 500,000. Today. Right now. Cash in hand, before anyone could ask questions, before social workers could intervene, before Gene Kowalski could change his wavering, lithium-addled mind. We'll take the advance, Rachel said. Not he'll take it. Not my father-in-law would like to. We. As if the money already belonged to her. Hayes nodded and produced the check from a locked drawer. It sat on the desk like a grenade with the pin half-pulled cream-colored paper. Treasury watermark, visible even from where I sat. Magnetic ink numbers printed in that specific font only banks use. $500,000. Made payable to Eugene Kowalski, Trust Beneficiary Disbursement. I'll need Miss Kowalski's signature first, Hayes said, sliding the page toward Maya. Maya picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed the name we'd agreed on, the name Rachel had invented. Sarah Kowalski. Clean, unhesitating strokes. And Mr. Kowalski, your authorization here. Hayes pointed to page 6. I signed. My hand trembled not from fear, but from the effort of keeping still when every muscle wanted to stand and roar. Wonderful. Hayes stamped the notarial seal with a brass press that thudded like a judge's gavel. Now, Mrs. Mitchell, apologies. Mrs. Kowalski. Voss, Rachel corrected, then caught herself. A flicker. The smallest crack in the mask. I mean, I handle the family's legal affairs. The check should be endorsed to me for deposit into the family operating account. Hayes tilted his head. Of course. I'll just need your identification and a countersignature on the endorsement line. Rachel was already reaching into her handbag. Driver's license. A business card from a law firm that no longer employed her. She placed both on the desk with the confidence of a woman who had never been told no. Sign here, please. Hayes slid the check across the oak surface. Rachel uncapped her own pen. A Mont Blanc, black and gold. Probably bought with money she'd stolen from someone else's father. She leaned forward. The pen touched paper, and then I spoke. Helen always said you could tell a person's character by what they reach for first. My voice was quiet. Steady. 50 years of shouting over North Atlantic gales had taught me that volume is weakness, calm is power. Rachel's pen stopped. She looked at me, The compass. I continued. You reached for the compass first. Before the house. Before the accounts. You knew exactly what it meant to me. And you used it as a key to unlock everything else. Tommy started from the doorway. Sit down, son. Tommy sat. I reached into my breast pocket and placed Helen's compass on the desk beside the check. Its brass caught the overhead light warm, golden, alive. This compass guided me home for 30 years, I said. And it guided me here. To this moment. To you, Rachel. Signing a fraudulent check in front of 3 federal agents. The color drained from Rachel's face the way water drains from a boat that's just hit rock. Fast, complete, irreversible. Agent Hayes reached beneath the desk and pressed a button. The office door opened. 2 agents in Navy windbreakers stepped through, badges visible, hands resting near their belts. Rachel Voss, Hayes said, and his voice was no longer warm. You are under arrest for wire fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, and attempted poisoning of a protected adult. Rachel's Mont Blanc clattered against the desk. The net didn't just close. It swallowed her whole. They handcuffed her in front of the schooner painting. I'll remember that detail until whatever comes after this life. Rachel Voss. Wrists pinned behind her charcoal suit jacket, standing beneath a ship that had weathered 100 painted storms, while she couldn't survive one real morning of truth. She didn't scream. I'll give her that. She didn't beg. What she did was worse. She turned to Tommy and said, in a voice as flat and cold as January's slate, "Fix this." 2 words. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I love you." Fix this. Like my son was a wrench in her toolbox. Like he existed only to tighten bolts she'd loosened. Tommy didn't move. He sat in the chair where I'd told him to sit. And he stared at the floor the way a dog stares at the corner after it's been struck. I wanted to feel anger. I wanted to feel vindication. What I felt was something heavier, something closer to grief. Agent Hayes read the charges aloud. Wire fraud. 3 counts. Elder abuse under Massachusetts General Law. Chapter 265. Section 13. K. Conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. Attempted poisoning of a protected adult. Forgery of vital records. Each count landed like a wave against a hull. Steady. Rhythmic. Unstoppable. Rachel's attorney arrived within the hour. A thin man in a blue suit, who smelled like courthouse coffee, and carried a briefcase that probably cost more than my first boat. He spoke in whispers to Hayes, to Morales, to anyone who would listen. Bail. Conditions. Extenuating circumstances. Agent Morales. A woman in her 40s with short black hair, and the patience of someone who had spent a career waiting for people like Rachel, laid 3 evidence bags on the desk. Bag 1. The lithium bottle. Fingerprints confirmed. Bag 2. A printout of Rachel's offshore bank transfers 6 payments to a Craigslist account traced to Maya's recruitment. Bag 3. A recording from the smoke detector camera. 47 minutes of Rachel coaching Maya on how to mimic a daughter's grief. Bail is not recommended, Morales said. Flight risk. Financial resources abroad. History of identity fraud. In 2 states. The thin attorney closed his briefcase. Rachel was escorted out through the back stairwell, past Gus's bait shop, into an unmarked sedan. The last thing I saw was the back of her head hair still perfect. Posture still straight, disappearing behind tinted glass. A shark in a tank now. Still dangerous, but contained. Tommy remained in the chair. I pulled a seat beside him. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to be heard. How long? I asked. He didn't look up. She came to me 2 years ago. Said we were drowning. Said your money, Helen's money, was just sitting there while we lost the house. You had a house because I co-signed the mortgage, Tommy. I know. His voice cracked. A hairline fracture, running through a word that carried 20 years of silence. I know, Dad. I waited. The sea teaches you this, that sometimes the only way to get a man to surface is to stop pulling. She found out about the trust. Tommy continued. I don't know how. Some filing at the courthouse. Something from Helen's estate. She said if we could prove a blood relative existed, the money would release automatically. She said nobody would get hurt. Nobody would get hurt, I repeated. She poisoned my tea, Tommy. She put cameras in my house. She hired a woman and planned to make her disappear once the check cleared. Tommy's head dropped lower. His shoulders trembled once a single convulsion, like a boat hitting a rogue wave broadside. I'm going to jail, he whispered. Probably, I said. Not cruel, not soft, just honest. The way the ocean is honest, when it tells you the storm is coming and doesn't care whether you're ready. Dad, not tonight, son. I stood. My knees ached. 74 years of salt, air, and steel decks lived in those joints. Tonight, I'm going to take Maya home. Tomorrow, I'm going to speak to Agent Morales about your cooperation. What happens after that depends on what you say and how much of it is true. Tommy nodded. He didn't look up. An agent appeared at the door, and my son stood slowly, like a man learning to walk on a listing deck. He followed the agent out, without a word. The office emptied. The cameras were still recording red lights, blinking behind their hiding spots, like tiny heartbeats in the walls. I stood alone in the fake bank, surrounded by props and evidence, and the lingering ghost of Rachel's perfume. I picked up Helen's compass from the desk. The brass was warm from the overhead light. I pressed it against my chest and closed my eyes. We got her, Helen. I said to no one. We got her. Maya appeared in the doorway. She'd removed the silver earrings, Rachel's costume pieces, and held them in her palm like dead insects. What happens to me? She asked. I looked at her. This woman who had been bought, threatened, trapped, and still found the courage to switch sides when it mattered. This woman who couldn't tie a fisherman's knot, but had held the line when the sea got rough. You come home, I said. We figure out the rest tomorrow. She nodded. And for the first time since that night, on the wharf, 13 days ago, a lifetime ago, Maya Torres smiled. We walked out together, past the brass nameplate, past Gus's bait shop, into a Gloucester morning so bright it hurt. The harbor stretched below us, boats rocking gently on the tide, and somewhere out beyond the breakwater, the Atlantic carried on patient, endless, indifferent to the small dramas of men who thought they could own it. But they couldn't. You don't own the sea. You learn it. You respect it. And if you're lucky, you survive it long enough to tell the story. 3 days passed before they let me see Tommy. 3 days of paperwork, depositions, and coffee so bad it could strip varnish off a hull. Agent Morales scheduled the visit for Monday afternoon, Cook County Holding Facility, room 4B. 30 minutes maximum. I drove the Volvo. Maya offered to come. I told her no. Some conversations belonged to the people who made the wound, and nobody else. The holding facility smelled like bleach and regret. A guard led me through 2 sets of doors, each one heavier than the last, each one sealing off another layer of the world Tommy used to live in. When I reached room 4B, my son was already seated behind a metal table bolted to the floor, orange jumpsuit. No wedding ring, they'd taken it at processing. His eyes were clear for the first time in years. Sober. Afraid. Young. He looked like he was 12 again. Like the boy who broke the kitchen window with a baseball and sat on the porch for 3 hours waiting to confess before I came home from the docks. Dad. His voice was small. I sat down across from him. The chair was cold. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like a trapped insect. I placed my hands flat on the table, both of them, palms down so he could see I wasn't carrying anger. Not today. I need to tell you something, I said. Something I should have told you 30 years ago. Tommy's brow creased. He'd expected a lecture. Expected fury, disappointment. The weather I usually brought into difficult rooms. Instead, I was offering him something he'd never seen from his father. Vulnerability. Portland, I said. November 1993. His eyes narrowed. That's what Rachel found. The birth certificate. The birth certificate was forged. But the truth behind it, I paused. Drew breath. 50 years of North Atlantic wind, and this was the hardest air I'd ever pulled into my lungs. The truth behind it was real. I told him everything. Not the version Rachel had twisted. Not the version Frank had uncovered in police databases. The real version, the one that lived in the part of my chest where Helen's compass usually rested. November 1993. A storm had grounded the fleet for 6 days. I was 41, restless, drinking too much. Helen and I had fought not about anything important, which made it worse. I drove south to Portland, checked into a motel near the waterfront. Drank for 2 days until my body gave out. Woke up in Maine Medical Center with an IV in my arm and a nurse named Linda Marsh writing my intake forms. Linda was kind. Patient. She didn't lecture me about the drinking. She brought me ginger ale and asked about the boats. And for 3 days in that hospital, I felt like someone other than the man I'd become. When I was discharged, I left my phone number on her nightstand. She never called. I drove home. Helen forgave me not because I deserved it, but because Helen's love was deeper than my failures. 8 months later, a birth certificate was filed in Cumberland County. Sarah Marsh. Born the 19th of November, 1993. Father. Not listed. But the hospital visitor log showed my name 3 days after the birth. I'd gone back. I'd seen her once, through the nursery glass. Pink face. Tiny fists. My daughter. Why didn't you? Tommy started. Because I was a coward. No decoration. No excuse. I told myself Linda didn't want me involved. Told myself it would destroy Helen. Told myself 100 things that were easier than the truth, which was that I failed that child before she ever opened her eyes. Tommy stared at me. I watched him doing the math, the years, the silence, the weight of carrying a brother or sister he never knew existed. Sarah died in 2010. I said. Car accident on I-95. She was 17. I found out 6 months after it happened, from a newspaper clipping Frank mailed me. I never told Helen. I never told anyone. The room was silent except for the fluorescent buzz. Tommy's jaw worked beneath his skin. Clenching. Releasing. Clenching. Does that excuse what I did? He asked finally. No. I said. Nothing excuses what you did, but it explains something about this family, that we carry secrets like stones in our pockets, and eventually, the weight pulls us under. Tommy's eyes filled. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just water rising in a vessel that had held too much for too long. I'm sorry about Sarah, he said. I'm sorry about you. I replied, and I meant it in every direction that sentence could travel. Sorry for what he'd done. Sorry for what I'd failed to teach him. Sorry for the father I wasn't. Sorry for the son he could have been. Morales says if I cooperate, fully testify against Rachel, provide all communications, they'll recommend 18 months instead of 3 years. Tommy swallowed. I'm going to cooperate. Good. Will you? He stopped, looked at the table, looked up again. Will you visit? I reached across the metal surface and placed my hand over his. His skin was cold. Mine was rough. 50 years of rope and salt and engine grease embedded in the lines of my palm. Every week, I said. Every single week until you walk out of here. Tommy nodded. A tear fell onto the metal table, a single drop, quickly wiped. I didn't mention it. Some things you let a man have without comment. The guard knocked. Time. I stood, pushed the chair back, and paused at the door. Tell me. He looked up. When you get out, I'm going to teach you to tie a fisherman's knot. A real one. The kind that holds. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one, the way dawn doesn't arrive all at once but announces itself in degrees, light by light, until suddenly the whole harbor is visible. I walked out of that room carrying less weight than I'd carried in 30 years. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness is a knot that takes time to tie properly. But the rope was in my hands. Both ends. And for the first time, I believed the line could hold. 6 weeks after the arrest, Rachel Voss stood before Judge Catherine Holloway in Suffolk County Superior Court and heard the number that would define the rest of her life. 15 years. No parole eligibility for 7. The courtroom was half empty, no family on her side. I sat in the third row. Maya sat beside me. We didn't speak during the sentencing. Some moments don't require words. They require witness. You show up. You watch. You let the weight of it settle into your bones, so you never forget what almost happened. Rachel's attorney filed an appeal before she'd even left the courtroom. Morales told me later it wouldn't go anywhere. The evidence was a mountain camera footage, bank transfers, the lithium bottle with her fingerprints, Maya's testimony, Tommy's full cooperation statement. Mountains don't move because a lawyer files paperwork. Tommy received 18 months at a minimum security facility in Danvers. Morales kept her word, his cooperation, his testimony against Rachel. His complete disclosure of every communication earned him the reduction. 18 months. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't the 3 years he'd been facing. And it wasn't the decade Rachel had earned. I visited him every Tuesday. Drove the Volvo up Route 128. Parked in the visitor's lot between a minivan and a pickup truck that belonged to other families carrying other versions of the same story. Every family has a fault line. The ones that survive are the ones that stop pretending the crack isn't there. Tommy was different inside. Quieter, but not in the way Rachel had made him quiet. This was a different silence, the kind that comes from thinking rather than hiding. He joined a woodworking program, built a bookshelf, built a jewelry box with dovetail joints that would have impressed Helen. When I told him that, he didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said, "I want to build something for Maya's mom. A picture frame. Something she can hold." That was week 9. That was the moment I knew my son was still in there, buried under years of Rachel's architecture, but alive. Still capable of thinking about someone other than himself. Maya's situation resolved faster than I expected. Agent Morales classified her as a cooperating victim, not a co-conspirator. The distinction mattered. No charges filed. Her testimony was entered under a cooperation agreement that included immunity for her role in the scheme, contingent on full disclosure. She disclosed everything. Every phone call. Every rehearsal. Every moment, Rachel had coached her on Gene Kowalski's habits, his house layout, his dead wife's possessions. She disclosed the life insurance policy, the one that would have paid Rachel $200,000 if Maya disappeared after the check cleared. That detail alone added 3 years to Rachel's sentence. I kept my promise about her mother. The Thursday after the sentencing, I drove Maya to Shady Grove Memory Care in Worcester. Martha Torres occupied room 112, a small space with a window facing a garden she could no longer name. She didn't recognize Maya that day. Alzheimer's had taken that from her. The way the sea takes everything eventually, slowly. Then all at once. I wrote a check for $64,000. The full balance, past due payments. Future care through the end of the year. A private aid, 3 days a week. The facility administrator looked at me like I'd made a mistake. I told her the only mistake would be letting this woman's daughter carry that weight one more day. Maya didn't cry when I handed her the receipt. She stood very still in the parking lot, holding the paper in both hands like it was a compass pointing toward a life she'd stopped believing existed. Then she said, "I don't know how to repay this." "You already did," I said. You chose the right side when it was easier to stay on the wrong one. That's payment enough for 10 lifetimes. Back in Gloucester, the house began to breathe again. I removed Rachel's cameras myself, pulled them from the walls with a flathead screwdriver, and dropped them into the harbor one by one. Each splash felt like a small baptism. The security system she'd installed went next, then the lock on the dock gate. I replaced it with a simple rope latch, the kind Helen and I had used for 30 years. Anyone who knew the knot could open it. Anyone who didn't, couldn't. That was security enough. Frank DeLuca came by on a Saturday with a bottle of Jameson and 2 glasses. We sat on the Mary Helen's deck and watched the harbor darken. He didn't ask how I felt, didn't offer wisdom or congratulations. He poured. I drank. The whiskey burned the way it's supposed to, clean and honest and warm. Brotherhood came through, he said after the second glass. Brotherhood always comes through. Gus wants his office back. I laughed. First real laugh in weeks, months, maybe. It came from somewhere deep. Somewhere I'd forgotten existed. Tell Gus he can have it. But the nameplate stays. Looks good above a bait shop. Frank grinned. Poured a third. We sat in silence until the stars appeared. And the boats rocked on the tide. And the world felt for the first time, since that 3:47 a.m. phone call, like a place I recognized. Maya moved into the guest room above the garage. Temporary, we both said. Just until she found an apartment. Just until things settled. But the weeks passed. And she was still there. And I found I didn't mind. She cooked on Wednesdays, terrible fish, improving slowly. She studied for her nursing license on the porch. Books spread across the table Helen used to cover with crossword puzzles. She asked questions about the harbor, about the boats, about the tides. And every evening, before the sun went down, she practiced her knots on the dock cleat. She was getting better. Not perfect, but better. And in Gloucester, that's all the sea asks of anyone. 6 months. That's how long it takes for a harbor to forget a storm. The pilings heal. The paint dries. The boats return to their moorings, and the gulls return to their arguments, and the fishermen return to their lies about the one that got away. 6 months, and Gloucester looked the same as it always had. Old, stubborn, beautiful in the way only working towns can be. But I was different. The house was different. The silence inside it had changed pitch. No longer the silence of absence, but the silence of peace. 2 different animals entirely. Tommy came home on a Thursday in April. I picked him up at Danvers in the Volvo. He carried a single duffel bag and the jewelry box he'd built for Martha Torres, cherry wood, brass hinges, dovetail joints. So tight, you couldn't slide a hair between them. He set it on his lap and held it the entire drive home, like a man carrying proof that his hands could make something other than mistakes. We didn't talk much on Route 128. The radio played oldies Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, the music Helen used to hum while folding laundry. When we crossed into Gloucester, Tommy rolled down his window and breathed in the salt air like a man surfacing after being held underwater. Smells the same, he said. Always will. He stayed in his old room for the first week. Then he found an apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, small, clean, affordable on the job Frank arranged for him at the boatyard. Sanding hulls, repainting trim, replacing rusted fittings. Physical work. Honest work. The kind that leaves your body tired and your mind quiet. Maya had transformed the wharf office into something Helen would have loved. New shelves lined with navigation manuals and tide charts. A whiteboard with the weekly slip assignments. A coffee pot that actually worked, unlike the ancient percolator I'd nursed for 20 years. She managed the 16 boats that called Kowalski Wharf home, handled the invoicing, negotiated with the fuel supplier, kept the books balanced to the penny. I didn't ask her to do any of it. She simply started one task, then another, until the wharf ran smoother than it had in a decade. The fishermen respected her, not because of me, Because she showed up at 5 every morning, learned their names, remembered their wives' birthdays, and never once pretended to know more about the sea than she did. She's got the temperament, Frank told me one evening over beers at the Crow's Nest. Not the salt yet, but the temperament. The salt comes with time, I said. Everything does. On a Saturday in May, Helen's birthday, I woke early and walked to the dock. The air was cool. The harbor glass flat. The sky turning from gray to gold, in that slow Gloucester way that makes you believe God might be a painter after all. I carried 2 things. Helen's compass and a 3-foot length of marine grade rope. Maya was already there. She stood at the end of the pier in rubber boots and a flannel shirt she'd borrowed from my closet and never returned. Her hair was tied back. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked like she belonged, and that word, belonging, carried more weight than any anchor I'd ever dropped. "Happy birthday, Helen," she said without turning around. I stood beside her. "Set the rope on the piling between us." "Today," I said. She looked at the rope, looked at me, set down her coffee. I showed her once. Slowly. The way my father showed me 60 years ago on this same dock, with this same kind of rope, under this same sky. Loop the working end. Pass it through. Wrap twice around the standing line. Tuck under. Pull tight. A fisherman's knot, the knot that holds 2 separate lines together so securely that the rope will break before the knot gives way. Maya watched. Then she took the rope. Her first attempt was wrong. Second attempt closer. Third attempt she paused, closed her eyes, felt the rope between her fingers, the way a musician feels strings. Fourth attempt. The knot cinched tight. Clean. Symmetrical. Perfect. She held it up. The morning light caught the braided fibers gold and white against the gray harbor. "It holds," she said. "It holds," I confirmed. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew the compass. Helen's compass. Brass, worn, engraved with coordinates that pointed to this exact spot on Earth. The compass that had started everything. The compass Rachel had stolen, Maya had carried, and I had placed on a desk beside a fraudulent check to catch a thief. I held it out to her. "Jean," she started, "it's not mine to keep anymore." I placed it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. The brass was warm from my pocket, from my body heat, from Helen's memory, from whatever energy lives in objects that have been loved long enough. Helen would have wanted you to have it. I know that the way I know. North from south. No hesitation. Maya looked at the compass. Her thumb traced the engraving, the coordinates. The tiny anchor etched beside them. A tear fell on the brass and she wiped it quickly. The way Tommy had wiped his in the holding facility. The same gesture. The same restraint. "Family, thank you," she said. "For everything. For believing I could be more than what she hired me to be." "You were always more," I said. "You just needed someone to see it." We stood on that dock for a long time. The harbor woke around us, engines starting, lines being cast, voices carrying across the water. The Kowalski Wharf flag snapped in the morning breeze, and somewhere a radio crackled with the weather report. Clear skies, mild winds, good seas. A fisherman's knot holds 2 lines together. Not because they were always connected, not because they came from the same spool, but because someone took the time to tie them properly, with patience, with intention, with the understanding that strength doesn't come from where you started. It comes from where you choose to hold. Helen taught me that. The sea confirmed it. And on her birthday, standing beside a woman who'd arrived as a stranger and stayed as family, I finally believed it was true. I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was 14 years old. Standing on this same dock, with blistered hands and a temper that could boil salt water, he said, "Jean, the sea doesn't care how strong you are. It cares how long you can hold on." I didn't understand that at 14. I thought strength meant force, meant gripping tighter, pulling harder. shouting louder than the wind. Took me 60 years to learn what he actually meant. Holding on isn't about muscle. It's about choosing every single morning to stay in the fight when everything in you says let go. 6 months ago, I almost lost everything. Not to the sea, not to a storm, to the people who were supposed to love me. My own son opened the door and let the wolves walk in wearing perfume and high heels. They drugged my tea, forged my documents, put cameras in the house where my wife died. Tried to convince the world I was a confused old man who couldn't remember his own name. And you know what saved me? It wasn't money. It wasn't lawyers. It wasn't even the FBI. Though God bless Agent Morales and her patience. What saved me was the same thing that saved every fisherman who ever made it back to port in a storm, knowing the difference between what's real and what's noise. The compass was real. Helen's love was real. The fisherman's not. The one my father taught me. The one I taught Maya that was real. Everything Rachel built was noise. Loud, convincing, expensive noise. But noise fades. The signal endures. If you're listening to this and you're 74 like me or 60 or 80 or any age where the world starts treating you like furniture instead of a person, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not confused. You are not senile. You are not a burden. If someone in your life is telling you those things, they are not trying to help you. They are trying to own you. Trust your instincts. The ones built over decades of living, working, loving, failing, and getting back up. Those instincts are sharper than any scheme. They're sharper than any forged document or prescription bottle with your name on it that you never asked for. Your life taught you things that no con artist can unlearn for you unless you let them. And if you're younger, if you're 30, 40, 50, and you're listening to this thinking it won't happen to you, I want you to hear something else. Check on your parents. Not once a year at Christmas. Not with a phone call that lasts 4 minutes while you're driving. Really check. Sit down. Ask questions. Look at their mail. Look at who's coming and going from their house. Look at whether they seem smaller than the last time you visited. Because Rachel didn't succeed because she was brilliant. She succeeded almost because Tommy stopped paying attention. Because my son let his wife handle everything, and handling everything meant controlling everything, and controlling everything meant I was alone in a house with cameras on the walls and lithium in my tea, and nobody coming to ask if I was okay. Don't let that be your family story. Now I want to talk about forgiveness. Because people ask me, they say, Gene, how can you forgive Tommy? How can you visit him every week? How can you let Maya live in your house after what she did? And my answer is this. Forgiveness isn't a feeling. It's a knot. You tie it deliberately, carefully, knowing exactly what it costs and exactly what it holds together. You don't tie it because the other person deserves it. You tie it because the line between you matters more than the mistake that frayed it. Tommy is my son. He did a terrible thing. Both of those statements are true at the same time. If I cut him loose, I don't become righteous. I become alone. And I've been alone. It's the worst storm I've ever sailed through. I won't choose it again. Maya was a stranger who became family. Not through blood. Not through paperwork. Through a choice hers and mine made in the dark. Under pressure. When it would have been easier for both of us to walk away. That choice is the fisherman's knot. Two separate lines joined by intention. Holding because someone decided they would hold. Family is not blood. I'll say it again, because the world keeps getting this wrong. Family is not blood. Family is who shows up at 3:40, 7 inches the morning, when the storm hits. Family is who ties the knot and refuses to let go. Family is the choice you make every day to keep holding the line. Not because it's easy, but because the alternative is drifting alone in open water with no compass and no shore. I'm 74 years old. I've buried a wife. Almost buried myself. Watched my son go to prison. And watched a stranger become my daughter. And I'm standing here on this dock, telling you whoever you are, wherever you are, that it's not too late. Not too late to check the knots. Not too late to build something honest. Not too late to look at the people around you and ask, are they crew or are they pirates? Choose your crew carefully. Tie your knots with intention. And when the storm comes, because it will come, it always comes, hold the line. That's the lesson. That's the only lesson the sea ever taught me that mattered. If this story meant something to you, if you heard yourself in it, or your father, or your mother, or someone you love, do me one thing. Share it. Not for me. For the next person sitting alone in a house with cameras on the walls, wondering if they're crazy. They're not crazy. They just need someone to remind them that the signal is still there, underneath all the noise. Hold the line. The knot will hold. I promise you that. Gene Kowalski. Gloucester, Massachusetts, May 2024.